Happy birthday. I knitted this sweater for him.
A sweater? How quaint. Did you find time to make it between cleaning shifts?
You called me poor. But every dollar of your salary came from me.
Poor in the company she built from nothing.
The sea wind rolled in heavy from Monterey Bay, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and rain. Evening had only just begun, yet the white mansion on the cliff already burned with light chandeliers glowing through tall glass walls, laughter spilling out into the fog like champagne foam. Eleanor Reed stood at the threshold, her coat buttoned to the neck against the cold. In her hands, she carried a small foil-wrapped gift bag. Inside was a red sweater, hand-knitted from soft merino yarn. Every stitch had been counted, measured, and tied with care, a gift for her grandson, Leo, 5 years old. Her last unbroken bond. She hesitated for a moment before ringing the bell. From inside, the sound of jazz floated through the door, mingling with clinking glasses and the low hum of expensive voices. Then came footsteps, quick, graceful, deliberate. The door opened. Chloe Parker Reed stood framed in the golden light of the foyer. She was the kind of woman people noticed, blonde hair swept into a perfect twist, a white silk gown that seemed to shimmer with its own confidence. Her beauty was undeniable, but her eyes were cool, appraising, like someone who had learned how to wound with politeness. "Oh," she said after a pause, her tone smooth but tight. "You came." Eleanor smiled faintly, her hands tightening around the little bag. "Of course. I wouldn't miss Leo's birthday for the world." Chloe leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, as if debating whether to allow the guest in. Her gaze swept over Eleanor's black dress, simple, pressed, but worn at the seams, the low heels, the faded pearls that had belonged to Eleanor's mother. "Well," Chloe said finally, "we're kind of in the middle of dinner. But come in, I suppose." Eleanor stepped inside. Warmth and perfume hit her at once, the rich scent of roasted duck and truffle, the sweet fizz of champagne. The living room sparkled, marble floors, white orchids, and a table set for 10 with silver cutlery and crystal glass. The guests, polished, confident, perfumed, spoke in the practiced rhythm of people who had forgotten what it meant to wait. Every face turned slightly as she entered, and every smile that greeted her was just a shade too polite. At the center of the room, Leo spotted her and lit up like a sunrise. "Grandma Ellie," he cried, running toward her. She bent down, catching him in her arms. His small body smelled of sugar and innocence. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she whispered, holding him tight. "I made you something special." Before she could hand him the gift, Chloe swooped in, her heels clicking against the marble. "Leo," she said brightly, "remember what we talked about? Grandma needs to wash her hands first. Go play with your friends, okay?" Her tone was honey-sweet, but her eyes glinted with steel. Leo hesitated, then slipped from Eleanor's grasp and disappeared into the crowd. Eleanor straightened, her throat tight. She wanted to speak, to say something light, something forgiving, but her words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself standing awkwardly near the end of the table. No one offered her a chair, so she pulled one out quietly and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. Around her, the laughter continued, champagne fizzing, silverware clinking. At the head of the table sat Marcus, her son. His suit was sharp, his tie perfectly knotted. When he caught her eye, he smiled thinly, nervously, and turned back to his plate. When the server reached her, wine bottle poised, Chloe raised a hand. "She doesn't drink," she said lightly. "It's not really her thing." A few guests chuckled. Someone asked, "Oh? What do you do, Mrs. Reed, right?" Eleanor smiled gently. "I own a small business." Chloe's voice chimed in before she could add more. "She runs a cleaning service," she said, her smile bright. "Very humble work." The table fell, silent for a breath too long. Then, softly, someone murmured, "How inspiring." The conversation shifted. Yachts, stocks, weekend houses in the Bahamas. The things people said when they believed everyone around them could afford to listen. Eleanor lifted her fork, but the food on her plate tasted like ash. She looked around the table, the glittering plates, the laughter bouncing like glass, and felt the slow, aching pulse of humiliation spread through her chest. When the birthday cake arrived, Leo ran back to her side, frosting on his cheek. "Grandma, tell me the story, the princess who saved herself." The piano stopped mid-note. Chloe shot up from her seat. "Leo," she said sharply, "not now. You'll get frosting on her dress." "But I want Grandma's story," I said now. The command cracked like lightning. The room froze. Chloe's smile was gone. Her face was marble. "I think it's time you left," she said, her voice low but cutting. Eleanor blinked. "What?" "You're making people uncomfortable," Chloe replied, gesturing subtly to the door. "Security?" The word hit the air like an open slap. The server hesitated, looking from one face to another. No one spoke. No one stopped it. Marcus half rose from his seat, his lips parting as if to protest, then closed them again. "Chloe, she's disturbing our dinner." Chloe interrupted smoothly. "Please escort her out." Leo began to cry. "Don't make Grandma go." No one answered him. Eleanor stood, her chair scraping against the marble. Her hands trembled as she reached for her bag. The room tilted, chandeliers spinning, faces blurring. The humiliation was sharp, physical, almost blinding. She turned once at the door. Marcus sat motionless, his eyes fixed on his plate. When the door closed behind her, the wind hit her face cold, raw, merciless. She stood beneath the porch light, rain starting to fall. The silver gift bag hung limp in her hand, the red sweater inside still warm from her touch. Through the tall windows, the party glittered on all light, no heart. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, a small woman, soaked, trembling, yet somehow unbroken. "They called security on me," she whispered to no one, her voice low and shaking. "But tomorrow, I'll show them who really holds the keys." The rain came harder, drumming against the stone steps, washing away the laughter and the lies. And as the sea wind whipped through her hair, Eleanor Reed lifted her chin, eyes blazing through the storm, the faintest spark of defiance burning beneath the ruin. The rain over Monterey didn't fall. It attacked. Each drop hit the pavement like a reckoning, hard, fast, relentless, as though the sky itself had seen what happened that night and demanded to wash it away. Eleanor Reed's old gray sedan crept along the winding coastal highway, tires slicing through pools of water that rippled with every gust of wind. The wipers strained against the downpour, screeching rhythmically, like a metronome for heartbreak. Inside, the soft crackle of a jazz station tried to fill the silence. A slow, melancholy trumpet drifted through the speakers, the same tune she used to hum when she worked late nights at the office decades ago. Tonight, it sounded like mockery, like the past had found her again, laughing. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. Every nerve felt raw, electric. The air in the car smelled faintly of wet wool and regret. On the passenger seat lay the silver gift bag, still unopened, rain-spotted, limp. The red sweater she had knitted for Leo sat inside, its threads damp and heavy, the yarn beginning to curl at the edges. It was supposed to have been a symbol of love. Instead, it had become an artifact, proof of how far love could fall when poisoned by pride. Eleanor's eyes stung, but the tears had already run their course. They had dried somewhere between the front door and the driveway of the mansion she'd once helped buy, the house where her own name had been erased from the deed. She had cried then silently, helplessly, but not anymore. Now there was nothing left to weep for. Only the sound of rain remained, only the taste of humiliation on her tongue. Only the silence that comes after a soul breaks in half. In the rearview mirror, the streetlights fractured her reflection into pieces. Her face appeared in flashes, rain-smeared, tired, but alive. Gray hair clung to her forehead. Her lipstick, once carefully applied, had bled into the corners of her mouth. Her eyes looked foreign, not soft, not kind, but carved. It was the face of a woman who had built a world, lost it, and was beginning to remember she could build again. "They called me poor," she whispered, the words scraping her throat. A bitter laugh caught halfway. "They've been living off my name for years." Her voice disappeared beneath the hiss of rain. But in the hollow of that sound, something else stirred, not sorrow, not anger, but purpose, a thin, bright spark cutting through the dark like a match struck in a cave. The car turned down a narrow lane, headlights slicing through fog. Ahead, a small brick apartment building appeared, hunched between cypress trees bent sideways by years of wind. Her building. Her refuge. The last place where no one could take her name from the doorbell. She parked by the curb and sat for a long moment, listening to the engine tick. Her fingers unclenched slowly from the steering wheel. Then she opened the door. The wind caught her coat immediately, whipping it back like a banner. Rain lashed her face, sharp and cold. She didn't raise the umbrella sitting beside her seat. She wanted the rain to hit her, to sting, to cleanse. Every drop was a truth she had ignored. Every gust of wind whispered, "You forgot who you are." By the time she reached her apartment, her hair was soaked, her shoes filled with water, and her breath came out in shallow bursts. She stepped inside, leaving a trail of wet footprints across the wooden floor. The room welcomed her with silence. A small lamp glowed on the desk, bathing the walls in soft amber light. On those walls hung a collection of photographs, pieces of a life she had built from scratch. Marcus, her son, at age 7, holding a toy plane, his grin missing 2 teeth. He had once said, "When I grow up, I'll protect you, Mom." Another frame showed her at 38, standing proudly among engineers in blue uniforms. The banner behind them read, "Reed Innovations, anew. ERA begins." And in the center the plaque, "Eleanor Reed, founder, Reed Innovations, 1989. She ran her fingers over the engraved letters. The metal was cold, but it hummed faintly with memory. That plaque represented every night she'd worked until dawn, every risk she'd taken when banks laughed at a woman asking for a loan, every line of code she'd written when no one believed she could. And the people who now called her humble, old-fashioned, the help, they were feeding off that legacy. They dined on her name while pretending they didn't know where it came from. Her jaw tightened. She went to the drawer of her desk and pulled it open. Inside lay a ring of keys, old, tarnished, but each one carved with a memory. The original office key from her first headquarters in San Jose. The master key to the prototype lab. The one Harold from security had engraved with her initials as a gift when they went public. She set the keys down on the table. The sound, metallic and certain, echoed through the quiet room. She sat, her spine straight, her hands steady now. In the mirror opposite her, a face stared back, older, yes, but not broken. Her gray eyes gleamed with a glint she hadn't seen in years. "They took my silence for weakness," she said aloud, her voice steadier than before. "Tomorrow, they'll hear what silence sounds like when it finally speaks." Outside, the storm deepened. The wind howled through the alley, rattling the windows. Waves crashed against the distant cliffs, each one like a drumbeat counting down to dawn. She reached for a photograph of Leo on the side table, his smile smeared with frosting, his little hands gripping her neck in that last hug. "For you, sweetheart," she murmured, brushing her thumb over his cheek in the picture. "Grandma's going to teach them what respect means." The clock struck 2. The sound was soft, but sure, the beginning of something irreversible. Eleanor moved to her desk by the window. The rain outside streaked down the glass like tears she no longer needed. She lifted the lid of her laptop. The machine hesitated, then hummed to life, bathing the room in a blue glow. Her password. Her name. The screen accepted both. Read Innovations Secure Access, CEO Mode. The words appeared on the screen, crisp and familiar. It had been months since she'd logged in, but her access as founder and chairwoman had never been revoked. They had forgotten to close the door behind her. The cursor blinked, waiting. She exhaled slowly, then clicked. The database unfolded before her, the heartbeat of her company. Dozens of divisions, projects, accounts, thousands of employees, and there, among them, one name stood out like a stain. Chloe Parker Reed, marketing director. Her son's wife. Her betrayer. The woman who had turned her legacy into a cocktail party anecdote. Eleanor stared at the name for a long moment. The rain hammered the window harder, as if the world outside were urging her forward. Then she smiled. Not the kind of smile that reached the eyes. This one was sharper, slower. A blade being drawn across its sheath. She didn't need revenge. She needed order. Her hands moved calmly, efficiently, as they once had in the boardroom. She opened internal reports. Employee evaluations. Payroll logs. HR complaints. Each file told a story of ambition gone, toxic, of voices silenced by fear. And through it all, Chloe's name appeared again and again. Eleanor turned off the lamp. The only light now came from the laptop, its glow painting her face in cold blue fire. Her reflection in the screen looked almost unreal, half shadow, half flame. Thunder cracked above the ocean. She leaned back in her chair, the hum of the storm and the computer blending into one. Her lips moved, almost soundless, yet every syllable carried the weight of something ancient and unstoppable. Tomorrow, she whispered. Chloe Parker Reed will walk into my world, and she'll never walk the same again. She closed the laptop. The light faded, leaving only the sound of rain, steady, cleansing, unending. Outside, the waves kept breaking against the shore. Inside, Eleanor Reed sat in stillness, drenched in quiet fury and hard-earned grace. The woman they had mocked, the woman they had dismissed, the woman they had underestimated. She was no longer the ghost at their table. She was the storm on their horizon. When the world turns its back on you, sometimes all you have left is yourself and the fire that pain leaves behind. When life gives you a chance to start over, would you let love back in? Comment 1 if you believe in second beginnings. Comment 2 if you'd rather guard your heart and build your peace alone. Dawn broke over San Francisco with a precision that felt almost deliberate, as if the city itself understood that something momentous was about to begin. A single slash of gold cut through the morning fog, catching the 42-story Reed Innovations Tower and setting it ablaze with light. The building, all glass and steel, shimmered against the gray horizon like a sword held up to the sun. A black sedan glided to a stop in front of the main entrance. The sound of the engine faded into the hum of the waking city. The driver stepped out, opened the rear door, and waited. Eleanor Reed emerged. Her heels met the pavement with unhurried certainty. The faint wind caught the edge of her pale gray suit, immaculately tailored, crisp as armor. Her silver hair was drawn into a sleek bun, her glasses narrow, understated. The face that had once crumpled under humiliation was now unreadable, a sculpture carved by restraint. Gone was the woman who had been escorted out of a dinner party like a trespasser. The woman walking into Reed Innovations this morning was a different creation altogether. The security guard by the door stiffened to attention. "Good morning, Mrs. Reed." Eleanor inclined her head, offering no smile. No need for one. As she stepped into the lobby, the sound of her heels echoed across marble, a crisp, commanding rhythm that silenced even the coffee cups of the reception desk. Each click was the same as a declaration: the founder has returned. The tower's lobby gleamed, a monument to her past. Sunlight fell through the glass atrium, striking the polished floor where the company's motto was engraved: built with vision, sustained by integrity. How ironic, she thought, that the very words had been forgotten by those now sitting in the upper floors. Her gaze brushed across the portraits, lining the main corridor, the company's most celebrated pioneers. There, at the beginning of the row, hung the oldest photograph of all, Eleanor Reed, age 35. Hair darker than, smile fierce, holding the framed certificate of incorporation. The caption read, Founder, 1989. She passed the portrait without stopping. She didn't need to look back at what she had been. She was here to remind them who she still was. The private elevator opened with a muted chime. Only executives had clearance to this one, though, technically. Eleanor's clearance was higher than all of theirs combined. Inside, mirrored walls reflected her from every angle, small, silver, composed, unstoppable. Her hand rested lightly on the rail as the elevator began its silent ascent. Time, she whispered to her reflection, to remind them who built the tower they worship. When the doors opened onto the 42nd floor, the air itself felt different, filtered, rarefied. The scent of roasted espresso mingled with the faint metallic hum of computers, the low murmur of assistants scheduling meetings for people who mistook position for power. At the end of the corridor sat Helen Wu, Eleanor's longtime assistant of 15 years. Helen looked up from her desk, her expression shifting from surprise to quiet reverence. "You're early today, ma'am," she said, rising. "I couldn't sleep." Eleanor's tone was smooth as tempered glass. "Pull up the employee file for Chloe Parker Reed. And the HR complaint logs for the last 18 months. Helen blinked, once a flicker of hesitation, then nodded. Right away. She knew better than to ask why. Eleanor walked into her office, the same one she had designed herself decades ago, when the tower was still just a dream of steel and light. The space was vast, minimalist, nearly silent. Floor-to-ceiling glass framed the San Francisco skyline, where the bay shimmered in the distance like molten silver. The morning mist curled around the bridge, giving the illusion that the entire city was floating. On the desk, perfectly centered, rested a brushed steel nameplate, Eleanor Reed, founder and chairwoman. The sunlight hit it directly, scattering light across her hands, veined, steady, ageless in their strength. She placed a hand on the nameplate for a brief moment, then she opened her laptop. The Reed Innovations logo spun slowly on the screen, its familiar spiral of blue light blooming like an awakening eye. The administrator interface appeared with a single soft beep. There it was, her domain. Thousands of names. Hundreds of departments. And amid them, glowing in black text, Chloe Parker Reed, Marketing Director. Eleanor's mouth tightened. She scrolled down. Performance summary. Dynamic, ambitious, influential. Highly effective in client relations, known for strong leadership style. And beneath that, in smaller type, 3 formal complaints: age-based discrimination, verbal humiliation, workplace hostility, status, dismissed. No further action taken. Her jaw flexed once. 3 complaints, 3 silenced women, 3 forgotten warnings. She could almost hear the echo of their voices, polite, restrained, ignored. She had seen this story before, long ago, in a world where men in boardrooms had dismissed her with the same smirks, the same condescension. Only now the oppressor wore perfume instead of cologne. Eleanor exhaled slowly and leaned back in her chair. "You humiliated me for being old," she murmured, her voice a quiet blade, "while building your career on the backs of people my age." The door opened softly behind her. Helen entered, carrying a thick folder bound in red. "Here's everything you asked for, Mrs. Reed," she said. "Complaints, internal reviews, email transcripts, incident reports." Eleanor took it from her and set it neatly on the desk. "Thank you, Helen. And one more thing, not a word of this leaves this office." Helen's eyes flickered with something between fear and admiration. "Understood." When she left, silence returned. A silence dense enough to feel alive. Eleanor stood and walked to the window. From here, the city stretched below her, like a living map, traffic threading across bridges, ferries cutting through the bay, thousands of people moving in synchronized chaos. Every one of them lived in a world. She had helped build a world designed on the belief that innovation was ageless. That intelligence did not rust. That respect, once earned, was a right, not a favor. And now, within that world, her daughter-in-law, arrogant, polished, untouchable, was desecrating that belief with every careless word. Her palm met the cool glass. Outside, the reflection merged her face with the tower's woman and monument. Flesh and legacy, the tower stood because of her. The city ran on what she'd imagined decades ago, and somehow they had forgotten. "You wanted a hierarchy, Chloe," she whispered, her voice low, almost tender. "Let's see how you survive at the bottom of it." A shaft of sunlight broke through the fog then, pouring across her reflection. The silver in her eyes caught the gold, transforming them into molten amber, the color of awakening. Coldness melted, purpose crystallized. This was no longer about vengeance. This was reclamation. Instruction. Balance restored. Eleanor turned back toward her desk, her movements precise and unhurried. She pressed the intercom button. "Helen," she said. "Set a meeting with HR. Effective immediately." Her tone was not raised, yet it carried the quiet authority of someone who had built empires. "Yes, ma'am," came the reply. Eleanor's fingers began tapping against the desk once, twice, again. A slow, deliberate rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was soft, but steady, a countdown no one else could hear. On the screen, the final words glowed as she entered them into the system. "Pending disciplinary review. Subject: Chloe Parker Reed." She stared at the text for a moment longer, then saved the file. The screen dimmed. The city outside roared with new life. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. A faint smile curved her lips, not of joy, nor of triumph. It was the smile of recognition. The look of a queen who had been cast out, only to reclaim her throne without spilling a drop of blood. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to make a scene. Her very presence was the announcement. Her silence was command, and command, in the hands of Eleanor Reed, was enough to make the entire tower tremble. The email went out on a gray Monday morning, the kind of morning when the fog pressed low and the city felt made of whispers. Just one line, tucked neatly among the corporate bulletins that filled every employee's inbox. As part of Reed Innovation's new hands-on leadership initiative, Director Chloe Parker Reed will spend 2 weeks embedded with operations to gain practical insights into the full service chain. It was crafted perfectly, professional, progressive, even benevolent. The kind of language that sounded like a vision statement but carried the precision of a blade. Only 2 people in the tower understood what it truly meant: Eleanor Reed and her assistant, Helen Wu, whose fingers trembled slightly as she pressed send. At 6 o'clock the next morning, the elevator doors at the basement level hissed open. The air was thick with steam, detergent, and the clatter of metal trays. The hum of dishwashers vibrated through the floor. It smelled of soap and steel, and the labor of those who kept the company spotless but unseen. And in the middle of that industrial cathedral stood Chloe Parker Reed. Her navy blue uniform hung awkwardly on her frame. The elastic cap barely contained her perfect hair. Her face was flushed, not from heat but humiliation. "There must be a mistake," she said, voice pitched high with disbelief. "I'm supposed to observe, not do manual work." Maria Alvarez, the shift supervisor, a woman in her 60s with silver hair tied back in a knot, didn't even pause in her scrubbing. She simply pointed toward the sink, her tone light but firm. "Observation starts with your hands, sweetie. Apron's on the hook." The words hung in the air for a moment before the laughter of pots and pans swallowed them whole. Chloe's jaw clenched. She reached for the apron as if it were a weapon she'd been forced to hold. 41 floors above, on the executive level, Eleanor sat before a monitor in her office. The basement camera feed flickered softly across the screen, a silent theater of poetic justice. She watched Chloe's struggle with the plastic apron, watched her glare at the soap bubbles that refused to bend to her will. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but her eyes, steady, gray, and bright as cut steel, held something unspoken. A part of her felt relief, almost peace. Another part, the one forged by loss and decades of work, felt weary. Revenge is never beautiful, she thought. It's just necessary. 2 days passed. By the second morning, the steam had stripped the gloss from Chloe's manicure. The scent of bleach clung to her hair. Her voice had grown sharp, brittle. "This is ridiculous," she snapped to no one in particular. "I have a master's degree in marketing. People down here don't even know what success looks like." Maria didn't glance up. Her hands moved steadily, her tone calm as water. "Maybe that's why we sleep better than you do." The other workers chuckled quietly. Chloe froze. Her cheeks flamed. It was a simple remark, but it sliced through the fragile armor she wore, the one built from self-importance and privilege. That evening, a janitor appeared in the corridor behind the cafeteria, gray shirt, rubber gloves, cap pulled low. No one noticed her. No one looked twice. She pushed a mop slowly down the tiled hall, her movements unhurried. Behind the small round window of the rebound kitchen door, she could see Chloe sitting at a metal table, her arms limp, her hands soaking in a bucket of soapy water. Chloe was speaking to a younger coworker named Louise. "I swear," Chloe muttered, "when this stupid experiment ends, I'll have that HR woman fired. Who do they think they are?" Louise hesitated, eyes darting nervously toward the cameras. "Maybe it's about understanding all parts of the company," she offered. Chloe snorted. "Please, people like us don't belong down here." Outside the door, Eleanor smiled faintly. It wasn't joy, it was a small, terrible kind of calm. 3 more days passed. Chloe did not change. She worked with the same impatience that had once made her powerful upstairs, only now it made her despised. She rolled her eyes when asked to wipe tables. She muttered insults under her breath. She treated everyone as though they were obstacles in her personal humiliation. Each time, Maria would respond in that same soft, weary tone. "Work reveals who we are, dear. Not what we say we are." And Eleanor, watching from her unseen post, realized the truth. Chloe hadn't reached the bottom yet. She still believed she could rise back up by sheer force of entitlement. She still thought this was a temporary detour, not a descent. On the 6th day, Eleanor once again donned the janitor's uniform. The disguise had begun to feel natural. The cap shadowed her silver hair, and the rubber gloves erased her hands' history, hands that had once signed million-dollar deals, now gripping a mop handle. In that anonymity, there was strange freedom. She was no longer the founder or the matriarch. She was invisible, and from invisibility, she could see everything. That afternoon, Chloe swept past her in the corridor, carrying a tray stacked with plates. She didn't even glance up. "I can't wait to get back upstairs," she muttered. "Where people actually matter." Eleanor stopped. The mop handle hung, still in her grasp. A shiver rippled down her spine, not of anger, but recognition. She had heard those exact words once, long ago. "You'll never matter," a venture capitalist had told her when she'd pitched Reed Innovations from a rented office 36 years ago. "You're too old, too inexperienced. People like you don't build companies." Now here it was, the same arrogance, repackaged in silk. She whispered to herself, so quietly even the humming lights couldn't catch it. "We'll see. We'll see who matters." That night, Eleanor returned to the 42nd floor. She peeled off the gloves, washed her hands, and stood in the glow of the skyline. Below her, the city pulsed with light veins of traffic and motion, like a living organism breathing beneath her feet. When Helen entered with the evening reports, Eleanor didn't look up. "She hasn't learned," she said flatly. "She's still blind." Helen hesitated in the doorway, holding the file. "Then, what now?" Eleanor turned toward the window, her reflection layered over the city lights. Then we open her eyes, she said. Slowly. Her tone was soft, deliberate, colder than the glass she was staring through. On her laptop, the next phase of the plan waited. A single command blinked at the bottom of the screen. Initiate review. Parker Reed. Chloe Phase 2. Eleanor pressed enter. The cursor froze for a moment, then disappeared. Outside, rain began to fall again, the soft, steady rhythm of San Francisco storms. Each drop rolled down the window like a clock tick, counting towards something inevitable. The woman who had once been humiliated at a family dinner now moved unseen through the empire she had built. She was everywhere and nowhere, the founder in the shadows, the queen behind the curtain. And as the city slept, she watched it all unfold. Each drip of rain against the glass was another second closer to Chloe's reckoning. Each heartbeat in Eleanor's chest whispered the same word: soon. Because some lessons, she knew, can only be learned after you've lost everything. Your image, your privilege, your pride. Only then does the mirror finally show you who you really are. When life gives you a chance to start over, would you let love back in? Comment 3 if you believe in second beginnings. Comment 4 if you'd rather guard your heart and build your peace alone. Friday. The San Francisco sky was flawless after days of rain. Sunlight poured across the glass panels of the Reed Innovations Tower, as if washing the city clean, yet inside, a storm waited. At exactly 9 a.m., an internal memo went out. Director Chloe Parker Reed, please report to the CEO's office at 10:00 a.m. for a leadership performance review. Chloe stared at the message, her pulse quickening. Part of her felt uneasy, but another part was certain this was at the end of her humiliation, the moment she'd reclaim her rightful place upstairs. She smoothed her hair, added a touch of lipstick, and stepped into the elevator, head held high. As the elevator rose, each glowing number felt like a heartbeat hammering in her chest. When the doors opened, she caught her breath. Marble floors, the faint scent of cedarwood, the entire top floor bathed in white light. At the far end of the hall, engraved in the glass door, were the words, Eleanor Reed, founder and chairwoman. The name tugged at something faintly familiar, but Chloe dismissed it. To her, it was just another faceless executive with too much money and too much power. Helen, Eleanor's assistant, greeted her, voice soft but firm. Mrs. Reed will see you now. The door opened. The office was filled with light. Behind the vast desk, a chair faced the window. Beyond the glass walls stretched the Golden Gate Bridge, glowing red against the morning mist. The crash of distant waves sounded like a heartbeat echoing through the silence. Mrs. Reed? Chloe's voice wavered slightly. No reply. The chair turned slowly, and Chloe froze. Eleanor Reed sat there. Not the trembling old woman from that dinner, but someone transformed, hair silver and luminous, gaze calm and sharp enough to pierce through glass. Her gray suit fit with quiet authority. The nameplate founder and chairwoman shimmered under the sun. Hello, Chloe, Eleanor said evenly. Please, have a seat. The simple words struck harder than a shout. Chloe stumbled into the chair. You're the CEO? She stammered, her throat dry. I am, Eleanor replied, a faint smile touching her lips. Always have been. The room seemed to expand around Chloe, too wide, too bright. Her eyes darted across the office, the company logo on the wall, the plaques, the framed photograph of a younger Eleanor shaking hands with the company's first investor. Her stomach turned cold. But you said you ran a cleaning business, Chloe whispered. I said I owned a business, Eleanor corrected gently. You assumed the rest. The air thickened. Only the wind outside dared to speak. Eleanor opened a file on her desk and rotated the screen toward Chloe. Let's talk about your work, shall we? On the display, 3 formal complaints: bullying, age discrimination, workplace hostility. Below them, a string of emails, Chloe's own words. Why do we still keep these dinosaurs around? Efficiency doesn't happen when fossils run departments. You called Margaret Lee obsolete, Eleanor said quietly. Robert Williams slow. Janet Alvarez unfit. Sound familiar? Those were just professional disagreements, Chloe stammered. Professional? Eleanor arched an eyebrow. The same way you called me poor? The color drained from Chloe's face. No words came. No defense, no mask, just the naked truth between them. Eleanor rose from her chair. She moved slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking softly on the marble each step a verdict. You humiliated me for being old, she said, her voice steady, while building your career on the backs of people my age. Chloe swallowed hard, chest tight. Eleanor stopped beside her. So, here's what's going to happen. She met Chloe's eyes unwavering. You have two choices. 1. You continue your assignment in the 𝐸𝐴𝐿 cafeteria. Keep working there. Learn what respect feels like when you've earned it. Her tone lowered, cool as a blade. Or 2. You resign today quietly. I'll make sure your record says you left to pursue new opportunities. Silence filled the room, thick as glass. Chloe stared down at her hands, the same hands that once held champagne flutes, now scarred from scrubbing dishes. They trembled. This is revenge, she managed. No, Eleanor said. This is consequence. No anger, no gloating. Just the calm authority of a woman who finally owned every piece of her story. Chloe rose slowly, unsteady. Eleanor's voice followed her soft, final. Every dollar of your salary came from me, Chloe. Remember that when you decide whether to wash another plate or walk away with what's left of your dignity. Chloe turned toward the door. Her hand shook so badly she could barely grip the handle. Sunlight flooded her face pale, hollow, and behind her, reflected in the glass, stood Eleanor, straight-backed, unbending, unbroken. The door closed. Eleanor returned to her desk and exhaled slowly. No smile, no triumph. Only silence, the silence of someone who had just reclaimed her stolen dignity. She thinks this is over, Eleanor murmured, her gaze drifting toward the Golden Gate, now blazing through the morning fog. But redemption doesn't come that easy. Late afternoon had draped itself across San Francisco like a silk veil, thin, soft, deceptively calm. The air smelled faintly of rain, and through the tall glass windows of Eleanor Reed's apartment, the sunset bled crimson across the skyline. The light struck every surface, the framed photographs, the polished table, the silver teapot, turning them into witnesses to what was about to unfold. Inside, the pendulum clock ticked in slow, deliberate rhythm. Each swing marked the time Eleanor had waited for, not just hours or days, but decades of patience hardened into resolve. The front door opened. Andrew Reed stepped inside, his shoulders stooped beneath an invisible weight. Behind him came Chloe. Her heels clicked softly on the hardwood floor, precise, controlled, the sound of someone still clinging to poise. Andrew looked tired. His face carried the hollow look of a man stretched between loyalty and disappointment. His hair was slightly unkempt, his tie loosened as though he'd fought too many arguments already that day. Chloe, on the other hand, was immaculate. She wore a white dress that framed her figure in the kind of effortless elegance she had perfected over the years. Her hair was pinned tightly, not a strand out of place. Her calm was practiced, a mask honed by years of manipulation. "Mom," Andrew began, his voice hoarse, "we need to talk." Eleanor turned from the window. Her expression was serene, her movements graceful as she poured tea into 3 delicate porcelain cups. "Of course, dear," she said, as if this were just another afternoon conversation. "Sit down." They did. The 3 of them formed a small triangle of tension in the soft glow of the room. Outside, the fog thickened. Rain began to whisper against the glass, a soft percussion that filled the silence. Chloe was the first to speak. Her voice trembled, but only slightly carefully measured to sound fragile. "I don't even know where to begin," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "I respected you, Eleanor. I truly did. But using your company to punish me because of a family misunderstanding, that's cruel." Andrew shifted in his seat, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mom, Chloe said you had her washing dishes. That's not leadership training. That's personal." Eleanor didn't respond immediately. Instead, she placed her teacup on its saucer, the soft clink slicing the quiet. Then she reached for a folder already sitting on the coffee table. It was embossed with the Reed Innovations logo. She had been waiting for this moment. "You both deserve the truth," she said, her voice neither raised nor sharp calm, crystalline, commanding. Chloe's composure faltered. "This is unnecessary. 3 complaints," Eleanor interrupted, her tone even. She opened the folder and began to read, each page turning with precision. "Margaret Lee, age 61, humiliated in a meeting and told to step aside for younger minds." She turned another page. "Robert Williams, 58, forced to work overtime on your personal projects." Another turn. "Janet Alvarez, 63, reassigned to night shifts because she didn't clean your meeting room fast enough." The ticking clock filled the silence between her sentences. Andrew frowned, looking from his mother to his wife. "Chloe, is that true?" Chloe exhaled sharply. "Those were professional issues," she said, her voice fraying. "I have high standards, sometimes." People. Eleanor lifted a small remote and pressed a button. The television on the wall flickered to life. Lines of text appeared in blue and white. Chloe's emails. "Why does HR keep these fossils around? If we replaced half the old staff, we'd actually move forward." The room filled with the cold blue glow of the screen. Chloe's face looked ghostly in its light. Andrew rose from the couch, staring at the evidence. His voice shook, but not from fear. "You called my mother poor," he said quietly, "in the company she built from nothing." Chloe stepped forward, desperation creeping into her tone. "Andrew, I didn't know. I didn't know she owned the company." Eleanor looked up. Her voice was soft, terrifyingly soft. "And that's supposed to make it better?" Chloe froze. "So if I had been what you thought, I was just an old woman with a small cleaning business, humiliating me would have been acceptable." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended over them. The rain outside grew louder, a steady rhythm against the glass. No one spoke. Andrew's expression shifted. Years of doubt, confusion, and blind trust collided inside him. His jaw tightened. His gaze turned toward Chloe, not in anger, but in realization. "Do you know what Leo asked me last night?" he said finally, voice low. He said, "Daddy, why did Mommy make Grandma cry?" The words hit harder than anything Eleanor could have said. Chloe's lips trembled. She reached for his hand, but Andrew drew his away. Eleanor watched silently, not gloating, not even satisfied. There was only a quiet sadness in her eyes, the kind that comes from seeing truth take its toll. Andrew turned to her, his voice cracking. "All these years, I thought you were being harsh. That you just didn't like her. But you were right." Eleanor shook her head gently. "No, son. I wasn't right. I was just patient." Her tone carried no triumph, only weary wisdom, the kind forged from endurance. Andrew stood tall. Something in him had changed. His voice, when he spoke next, was calm, resolved, final. "Chloe Parker Reed," he said, "get out of my mother's house." Chloe's eyes widened. "Andrew, please, get out." The words were quiet, but they struck with the force of thunder. For a moment, Chloe didn't move. Her expression fractured fury, disbelief, and grief all flickering across her face. Then she turned to Eleanor, voice shaking with venom and despair. "You wanted this," she hissed. "You wanted to destroy my marriage." Eleanor's gaze was steady, her tone soft as silk, cold as truth. "No, you destroyed it the moment you mistook kindness for weakness." Something in Chloe broke. The mask slipped entirely. She turned sharply, her heels pounding against the wooden floor. Click, 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 each step a retreat, each sound an echo of an empire collapsing. When the doors slammed, the silence that followed felt vast. A gust of wind slipped through the small gap in the window, carrying with it the faint scent of Chloe's perfume, the sterile sweetness of pride newly scorched. Andrew sank into the nearest chair, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. His shoulders trembled. Eleanor crossed the room quietly and placed a hand on his shoulder. Neither spoke. The only sound was the rain, falling harder now, blurring the view of the city beyond the glass. For a long moment, they simply sat like that, mother and son, two survivors of the same storm. Finally, Andrew whispered, voice thick with grief. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have seen it sooner." Eleanor bent down and wrapped her arms around him. He leaned into her, the weight of years collapsing into that one embrace. She closed her eyes and murmured against his hair. "My son finally saw the truth." They stayed like that for a while, not speaking, not crying, simply breathing. The clock ticked on, the rain fell, and somewhere in the city, the fog began to lift. There was no victory in the room, no satisfaction. Only peace. The kind that comes when the truth, at last, has no more reason to hide. Outside, the lights of San Francisco began to bloom one by one, soft halos in the mist. The city kept moving as it always did, indifferent to triumphs and heartbreaks alike. But inside the small apartment, something profound had shifted. The lies had finally run out of places to live. Sometimes, Eleanor thought as she looked out into the rain, truth doesn't come wrapped in apology or a grand gesture. It comes quietly in the moment someone dares to look at what they've done and can no longer look away. When life gives you a chance to start over, would you let love back in? Comment 5 if you believe in second beginnings. Comment 6 if you'd rather guard your heart and build your peace alone. A month had passed since the storm. San Francisco had returned to its usual rhythm, the symphony of cable cars, the hush of ocean fog rolling in from the bay, the flicker of city lights blinking awake at dusk. But for those who had seen the fall of Chloe Parker Reed, the city didn't feel the same. Something invisible had shifted, a tremor beneath the polished calm. In the boardrooms and penthouses where gossip traveled faster than truth, her name still echoed like a rumor too sharp to fade. The fall of the golden daughter-in-law. The humiliation in the tower. The quiet reckoning at home. The woman who had once stood beside the founder of Reed Innovations, poised, admired, unassailable, had vanished. Her social accounts disappeared overnight. Her phone numbers went dead. No one had seen her in the city since the day she walked out of Eleanor's apartment with her pride in pieces. Some said she'd gone back to New York, where her family's name still opened doors. Others whispered she was in Europe, finding herself the way people with too much money and too little accountability often did. But Eleanor Reed knew better. People who refused to face their own reflection didn't heal. They simply ran. And they ran until the silence caught up. Meanwhile, the old seaside apartment in Monterey, the one that had once been too quiet, too full of ghosts, had come alive again. Every weekend, Andrew and little Leo made the 2-hour drive down the coast. The sound of their arrival, the creak of the old gate, Leo's laughter racing up the stone steps filled the air like music. Gone were the awkward silences that used to linger between mother and son. Gone were the polite small talks over strained dinners. Now there was only the smell of fresh bread baking in the oven, the warmth of tea steaming in the kettle, and the sound of Leo's small hands clapping dough onto the kitchen counter. One golden afternoon, sunlight spilling through lace curtains, Eleanor guided Leo's hands across the floured surface. His giggles mixed with the rustle of the sea breeze, drifting through the open window. "Grandma, is Mommy still mad?" he asked suddenly, looking up at her with wide, curious eyes. Eleanor paused. For a moment, her hands stilled. She brushed a streak of flour from his cheek and smiled, gently. "No, sweetheart, she said softly. She's just learning. Leo frowned a little, puzzled. Learning what? That love doesn't live in fancy houses or shiny cars. She placed her palm over his small chest. It lives right here in a heart that knows how to be kind. The boy nodded, not fully understanding, but somehow accepting it with the easy faith only a child could have. Then, I think my heart's already kind, he said proudly. Eleanor chuckled, a sound that carried warmth instead of sorrow. It is, my darling. It truly is. Across the bay, Reed Innovations was changing too. Under Eleanor's leadership, the company had begun to breathe again, slower, steadier, more human. The endless late-night meetings were gone. The culture of fear and performance had been dismantled brick by brick. The tower no longer pulsed with the same cold efficiency that Chloe once worshipped. Now, there was conversation, laughter in the halls, and most shocking of all, respect. A month after Chloe's departure, Eleanor announced the company's newest initiative, the Silver Hands Project. At the launch event, the 42nd floor auditorium was filled to capacity. Employees, young, old, engineers, assistants, janitors all gathered, curious. The lights dimmed, and Eleanor stepped onto the stage. Her silver hair glowed beneath the spotlights, a halo of quiet power. Behind her, the new slogan appeared on a massive screen. Experience is a strength, not a liability. She began to speak, her voice low but steady, the kind of voice that drew the room into silence. In a world that worships speed, she said, we've forgotten the value of patience. In a world obsessed with youth, we've dismissed the wisdom that built it. It's time to change that. Her words hung in the air, simple yet seismic. The Silver Hands Project would offer scholarships and job opportunities to older workers who had been pushed aside, people whose skills, loyalty, and humanity had been deemed outdated by a culture that only measured worth in youth and speed. When Eleanor finished, she called someone to the stage. Maria Alvarez, she said. There was a ripple through the crowd. Maria, the kitchen supervisor who had once worked beside Chloe in the basement, looked stunned. Slowly, she rose, guided by applause. Eleanor handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter of promotion, supervisor of operations. Maria's eyes filled instantly. Her voice shook as she whispered, "You believed I mattered." Eleanor smiled, her hand resting over Maria's. "You always did," she said gently. "They just needed to see it." The room erupted in applause, not polite, corporate applause, but genuine, sustained, human. For the first time in years, Reed Innovations didn't feel like a machine. It felt alive. That night, long after the crowd had gone home, Eleanor remained in her office. Outside, San Francisco glittered below her, 1,000 tiny stars mirrored in glass and water. On her desk sat a single photograph, her first team at Reed Innovations, back in 1989. They were young then, laughing, arms around each other, eyes bright with hope. Every one of them had since retired. She traced her fingers across the image, then looked up at her reflection in the glass. Her hair was silver now, her hands lined with time, but her eyes were still the same. A tear slipped down the glass of the frame, catching the city lights as it fell. Not a tear of grief, but of recognition, the quiet satisfaction of a circle closing. She used cruelty as currency, Eleanor whispered into the empty room. I'll use kindness as legacy. She closed her laptop, put on her coat, and stepped into the elevator. As she descended, the digital numbers glowed softly, 42, 38, 30, each floor a reflection of a different kind of story. Through the glass panels, she could see employees still working, still talking, still building something that mattered. Young designers with notebooks filled with dreams. Older engineers with steady hands and knowing smiles. Men and women of every color, every accent, every past, all part of something larger than themselves. When the doors opened, she stepped out into the lobby. The night air outside was cool and sharp, carrying the salt of the ocean. The streetlights shimmered across the wet pavement. She walked slowly toward the plaza. The sea breeze tugged gently at her coat, carrying with it the distant hum of the city cars, laughter, life continuing. Eleanor paused at the edge of the plaza and looked toward the Golden Gate Bridge. It rose against the horizon, glowing red beneath the dimming sky. Mist curled around its cables like silver threads, fragile but unbroken, connecting two worlds, the one she had come from and the one she had remade. Her breath clouded in the cool air. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of memory pressing on her chest. She felt light not because she had won, but because she had let go. A soft smile touched her lips. There was no need for victory, no need for grandeur or vengeance. It was enough to know that kindness, steady and quiet, had outlasted cruelty. It was enough to know that love, true, unadorned, enduring, had returned to her life in the form of laughter in a kitchen by the sea and in the small, flower-dusted hands of a boy who still believed in good people. Above her, the bridge lights shimmered through the fog. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the ocean and the faintest sound of the tide. And for the first time in years, Eleanor Reed, the woman they had once called weak, foolish, forgotten, felt entirely, beautifully at peace. 6 months later, late afternoon in Monterey Park. The sky was painted in warm shades of amber, the ocean waves lapped gently against the sand, and seagulls drifted overhead like soft brushstrokes across a quiet canvas. No noise from the city, no echo of power or conflict, only peace. Eleanor sat on an old wooden bench, wrapped in a beige sweater, her silver hair glowing softly in the golden light. Beside her, 5-year-old Leo was busy building a small sandcastle, his tiny hands covered in grains of sand, his laughter ringing bright and pure. "Grandma, look, the princess lives here," he shouted, eyes sparkling. Eleanor smiled, leaning down to admire his creation. The sand tower stood in uneven layers, crowned with a single dry blade of grass, fragile, yet strong enough to stand against the sea breeze. "That's a strong castle," she said softly. "Did the princess build it herself?" "Yes, because she didn't wait for the prince," Leo replied proudly. Eleanor laughed, a sound light as the wind, dissolving into the hush of the waves. Sunset cast a gentle gold across her face. Her life had once been filled with glass offices and sharp mornings, long nights of loneliness and betrayal, and countless times she'd risen from the ashes without a word. Now, sitting in a quiet park beside her grandson with sand, laughter, and sunlight, she felt richer than she ever had in all her years of success. "Grandma?" Leo asked, his tone curious. "Did the princess in your story forgive the dragon?" Eleanor looked toward the horizon, where the sun was sinking into the sea, its light scattered across the water like gold dust. "Yes, sweetheart," she answered gently. "Because she learned, dragons are only dangerous when they forget they can be kind." Leo nodded, thoughtful for a moment, then smiled and went back to building his castle. A soft breeze passed through, lifting a few strands of her silver hair, framing the face of a woman once cast out from the dinner table, who had rebuilt her world with nothing but grace. From afar, Andrew approached, a cup of coffee in hand. "He's been waiting all week for this," he said warmly. "And so have I," Eleanor replied with a quiet smile. Mother and son sat side by side, watching Leo play in the sunset. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Every unspoken word, every tear once shed, dissolved into this still moment, the moment life finally decided to be gentle. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt, of grass, of laughter. Eleanor lifted her gaze toward the horizon. Light touched her hair, reflected in her deep brown eyes, calm, bright, and alive. Her voice, more whisper than sound, carried the weight of peace and power all at once. "They called it revenge. I call it redemption. And that, my dear, is real power." The camera in the mind's eye, slowly pulled back, leaving only the silhouettes of a woman and her grandson, bathed in the last gold of the day. Waves rolled, wind drifted, and Leo's laughter echoed softly across the shore. A life had come full circle, not in hatred, but in forgiveness and light. And when the hatred fades, only one question remains. Do you have the courage to love again even after being betrayed? When life gives you a chance to start over, would you let love back in? Comment 7 if you believe in second beginnings. Comment 8 if you'd rather guard your heart and build your peace alone.